Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Naruto and Mito reunite with family and harem part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Harry's Otter for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. Naruto glared at Sasuke through lidded crimson eyes. Sasuke stared back, the glow of the Sharingan hypnotic in the gloom of the forest. The forest was quiet. Any and all fauna had been driven miles away by now, with the continuous clashes of ninja within the forest. The only sounds to be heard were Kimimara's insistent coughing, and Chuji's somewhat hysterical gasps. Mito was still healing from the damage she had taken when the barrel had unexpectedly broken open. Then, Sasuke scoffed. "You're the one they sent to stop me, dope? They could have as well told me to stay away." Naruto looked incensed. Chuji, looking from the sidelines, saw his canines peek out of his mouth as a warning growl burst from his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than normal, sounding feral as he glared daggers at the Uchiha. "I bet you're proud of yourself, huh, Sasuke? I hope you know you've just signed the death warrant of not only yourself, but the entire Uchiha clan. What a wonderful clan heir you turned out to be, but then I suppose you never were, you know. After all, Itachi is the Uchiha clan heir." Sasuke's Sharingan spun in irritation as he grit his teeth. However, before he could retort to Naruto's taunt, a shaky voice cut in. "Sasuke-sama, Orochimaru-sama sends his regards, but you must hurry. You will be late. Go. I will hold them off, and you are Kage Kimimaro, previous leader of the Sound Five." Looking between Naruto and Kimimaro, Sasuke paused, indecisive. Then he shook his head, before speaking without turning to face him. "Very well. Do not let them follow. I have no time for the likes of them." Turning abruptly, Sasuke sprinted into the forest. With a growl, Naruto leapt to his feet, running after Sasuke, only to run straight into the path of Kimimaro's bone vine. Muttering a curse in his throat, he turned to stare murder on the Kage. "You are going to regret that." In a flash, the surrounding was overwhelmed with clones, each of them carrying a Rasengan as they charged at Kimimaro, who was panting with exhaustion and coughing blood. He gave the approaching Naruto's a somber glance. "So it has finally come to this, no matter. I shall die as I have lived, in the service of Orochimaru-sama." Dance of the seedling fern. Bones sprouted from the ground, sharp-tipped curved bones of enormous sizes sprouting all over the patch of forest, making it resemble a monster's graveyard. Most of Naruto's clones had been dispelled in the attack. However, a few had managed to cling onto the rising surfaces, while another had managed to rescue the unconscious Mito. Chuji, looking shell-shocked, had just managed to scramble onto an unharmed tree, and he was now waving frantically to Naruto. "Naruto! You go after Sasuke, I take care of things here." Gesturing wildly at the forest of bones, he looked at Naruto with a small grin. "Besides, this is more suited to my style anyway. Multi-size technique. Human bullet tank." As Chuji began to carve a path of destruction through the newly created bone forest, Naruto positioned himself in the middle of the bone field. "Don't be mad. I've seen these types of Kekkai Genkai before, and if this is what I think this is, it isn't going to be pretty." Suddenly, all the surviving clones of Naruto began to pop. "Well," Naruto thought as his clones continued to dispel, "at least he doesn't seem to be able to identify me from the clones." Settling into a meditative stance, Naruto closed his eyes in order to obtain a fledgling sense of where Kimimaro was. After all, he had seen this very same tactic with Haku in the Land of Waves. It was never good news when an elemental Kekkai Genkai user disappeared into the element of his choice. Suddenly, he noticed the warped chakra of Kimimaro, right behind Chuji, hiding inside a bone spear. "Chuji, get away!" Even as Chuji, still in his round form, bounced up and out of the clearing, 6 spiked chains shot out of Naruto, each traversing the length of the bone field and each at a slightly different height from the other. Kimimaro, half out of the bone spear, barely had time to look shocked, as the chains began to spin along their axis, forming 6 drills that tore away nearby bone spears. Naruto held his hands out horizontally, away from his body. "Well, we'll see how this works." Spiked chains, atomic separator. Naruto spun in place, and the spinning chakra chains whipped through the bone forest with the scraping sound of ground bone. Kimimaro, trapped in place by the very technique he had used, attempted to form a bone cage around him, but before he could complete the bone growth, the first of the chains smashed into his stomach with a spray of blood. Kimimaro's screams echoed around the clearing, as one by one, 5 more of the rapidly spinning chains crashed into his half-emerged body. When Naruto's technique finally stopped, a silence descended on the clearing. Chuji, safely out of the range of the clearing, gulped nervously. He seemed to be holding back the urge to retch, and as the bone splinters settled, Naruto understood as the area around where Shikamaru had been was bathed in blood, the same brackish blood Naruto had noticed in Jirabu. And in the center, half buried in the bone he was exiting, were what remained of Shikamaru, resembling not so much a human as a lump of shredded meat. Doing his best to ignore the carnage he had caused, Naruto turned away from the sight to look at Chuji, who flinched, not meeting his eyes. Naruto, ignoring the reaction, tonelessly spoke. Well, now we don't have a barrel to protect, you better go help the others. Looking to the north, where the Uchiha had vanished to, he growled. Sasuke is mine. Gulping, Chuji spoke as he turned away, preparing to go after the renegade Uchiha. Naruto, are you sure you can fight? He gestured to Naruto's battered form, and his tattered clothes. Naruto simply gave him a bloodthirsty grin before turning back and disappearing into the forest, followed by a silent clone carrying the form of Mito. His voice floated back to a petrified Chuji. More than enough to kill the fool. Chuji stared at the forest into which Naruto had disappeared, before shrugging and following him. He might as well regroup with Shikamaru. He would know what to make of this, anyway. As Naruto silently tree-hopped, following the trail of Sasuke, he was deep in thought. The last technique he had used in the clearing had been one he had invented during practice last night, and Mito had immediately vetoed his use of the technique until he was more proficient at the manipulation of the chains. She had thought that Naruto had not been ready to see the destruction caused by, in her words, a crude and inelegant technique. Naruto had vehemently disagreed, before he had been reluctantly cowed into not using it by Mito. At that time, he had considered Mito to be stifling him, to be coddling him from a reality he considered himself exposed to from his youth. Now though, after he had seen the results of his more destructive jutsu, he was beginning to reconsider his opinion. Naruto had had a rough childhood. Growing up on the civilian sectors of Konoha, so soon after the Kyuubi disaster, had not been easy for a child publicly known to be the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. However, now that he thought about it, it had also allowed him a certain disassociation with the realities of life in Shinobi Village. Naruto had never killed before this mission, which had proved a surprise to Jiraiya when he had inquired on Naruto's first kill, back when he had been training for the Chunin exam. He had been offended at the time, thinking that Jiraiya had been implying that he was a monster. Before Jiraiya had sat down to explain, Naruto's techniques, simply put, were not aimed towards capture. Even the basic Kuchiyose jutsu that Naruto could employ was geared towards straight combat. Naruto supposed that it was even more so with his Uzumaki chakra expression. After all, there wasn't many ways to not kill when using giant chains with foot-long blades poking out from every link. However, whether from Kakashi's design, or his own unpredictable luck, he had, until now, managed to avoid killing anyone. He scoffed derisively. Well, that had lasted long enough. Now, 7 months into his shinobi career, Naruto had taken his first life, and just now he had taken his second. And he now understood what Mito had meant when she had said that using that technique would haunt him. Naruto was not sure he would be able to stop hearing that final scream of Shikamaru. Jiraiya, when discussing kills with him, had told him a lucky shinobi gets a clean kill. Naruto supposed he could understand that. Naruto's first kill had been Jirabu, but at the time he had been too drowning in the Kyuubi's chakra, and he had barely noticed the actual kill. On the contrary, Shikamaru had been killed in a conscious decision, one that had little to do with him, and more to do with time. On top of that, the death had been prolonged, and extremely messy, and as Naruto was directly connected to his chains, he had felt as each blade had entered Shikamaru's body again, and again as the blades cut into him. It was, after all, the reason he had named the technique Atomic Separator. When he had tried the technique on the training logs, each log had been roughly gouged into sawdust by the fast-spinning blades. However, that had not prepared him for what Shikamaru's corpse had looked like after being exposed to the technique. A fine mushy blob of pinkish flesh, draining blood onto the surroundings. Naruto shuddered, trying to distract himself from the images. He did not need to be freaking out when he was going to face Sasuke in what was sure to turn out to be a death match. Whatever his other faults, Sasuke was a skilled shinobi, and his Sharingan was hard to counter. Suddenly, a giant humanoid construct lumbered into sight, blindly swinging a giant club, before it suddenly disappeared in a cloud of chakra. A summon? Here? Well, if thought rationally, that had to mean that there was some sort of sound shinobi nearby, probably engaging one of his teammates. He was less sure of who the controller of the summon was, though he supposed it couldn't be the six-armed one, so it was probably the kunoichi or the two-headed shinobi. Naruto smirked. He would bet on Shikamaru fighting the kunoichi. The pineapple-haired Chunin was just unlucky that way. Anyway, he couldn't help them personally. He had to stop the idiot before he crossed the border, or risk open war with the Sound. Not that Konoha couldn't take them on, but according to Ghost Lady, Bachan didn't want open war just yet. And shadow clones were out of the question. Not only would they be useless without him to direct them in battle, seeing as they still had the tendency to fight each other, but his chakra was getting low as it was. He hoped it would recover before the fight, or he might have to rely on the Kyuubi's chakra, and it was not fun. Well, seeing as the opponent was a summon user, albeit of non-living creatures, he supposed he could help. Running through a series of hand seals and nicking his thumb, he slapped a branch as he hopped past it. Kuchios no Jutsu. Hello, Naruto-chan. A simpering voice called out from the smoke. Naruto resisted the urge to facefault as he looked back at the toad. The toad, comfortably keeping up with him as he ran, waved a webbed foot at him in an overly feminine way. Staving off a headache through will alone, Naruto addressed the toad. Hello, Gamariki-san. And why did Naruto-chan call little me today, ribbit? Gamariki batted his eyelashes at a repulsed Naruto. Naruto sighed. This toad was the best at getting under his skin, even more than the toad boss or Gamatatsu. I didn't. I was hoping for Gamabu, Naruto deadpanned. But you'll do, I guess. Well, I never. Gamariki simpered, pouting at Naruto through painted lips. Naruto repressed a shudder. Doesn't Naruto-chan like me? No, Naruto said flatly, but I want you to go help a teammate of mine. He's fighting an opponent about 300 meters away, in that direction. Just help any Konoha shinobi there. I've given you a little extra chakra. Gamariki didn't seem to be listening, instead glaring at Naruto through heavily lidded lashes. Naruto-chan, that was rude. Naruto's patience was waning. Damn it, Gamariki. Just go there and help. It's a life and death situation. The large toad's expression changed abruptly. You should have led with that, brat. It rebuked, with a deep voice that was totally at odds with his usual simper. Ooh, I smell spiders. See you later, Naruto-chan. It added flirtingly in its normal tone as it hopped away, heading in a different direction to where Naruto had pointed. That's the wrong direction. See you later, Naruto-chan. Gamariki waved nonchalantly, totally ignoring Naruto as he hopped away and out sight. Naruto stared at the toad disbelievingly, before shaking his head and continuing to trace Sasuke's scent. After all, Konoha had its Mito guys and its Rock Lees and its Jiraiya's. Who was he to complain about a strange toad? Kuchios, Kayadegimo, Amigumo, Kaiten. Niji continued to spin as the chakra shell of the Kaiten spun around, scattering the falling spiders. Leaping away from the overhanging web, a transformed Kadamaru turned to face Niji. Face it, Hyuga. You'll have to come out of your cage sometime, and then it's going to be game over for you. Niji struggled to continue the spin of the technique. It was getting harder with his body being weighed down by the webbing issuing from the baby spiders. Yelling inarticulately, Niji stopped spinning before settling into a stance. 8 trigrams, 128 palms. With pointed beams of blue chakra issuing from his hands, Niji's hands sped up as he systematically bisected each and every spider around him, while avoiding the arrows shot at him by Kadamaru from the other side. But he was getting tired. He wouldn't last much longer if this onslaught continued. However, moving now was impossible since if he tried to move he would have to let his guard down, which would let either the spider or the arrows hit him. Neither was advisable. He needed all his mobility for this fight. Cursing under his breath as he smoothly transitioned from the 128 palms back to Kaiten, Niji tried to think of a way to escape the trap, when all of a sudden a beribboned toad was in the middle of the clearing. Yummy! With an exclamation, Kadamaru's Kayadegimo was pulled into a pair of painted lips, where it hung limp. Kadamaru yelled in anger, firing an arrow into its eyes, but the toad simply batted it away, before giving Niji a disturbingly coy look after it had swallowed the giant spider. Hello there, Hyuga-chan, I'm Gamariki. Naruto-chan sent me to help you. The toad proceeded to bat his eyelashes at him, pouting at him in what was obviously meant to be a Y pose. Skin crawling, Niji looked away, a long-suffering sigh escaping his mouth. A drag queen toad was Naruto's idea of help? That guy had problems, though he supposed it had helped him out, since now that the spider summon was out of the way, the fight was much more even. It still did not make it less disturbing. Hyuga-chan, climb onto me. Gamariki simpered, making Niji fight the urge to retch, face coloring. Hearing the snort escaping from the Kadamaru only managed to anger him further, but he nevertheless complied. The name is Niji. Hyuga Niji, he grumbled, as he climbed atop the toad, sitting astride its neck. Gotcha, Niji-chan. Kadamaru chose this moment to intervene, getting fed up of his arrows getting caught by a prehensile tongue. Heh, Having a friend send you a summon to help you, that's a new low, even for you, Konoha trash. Yeah, because you don't use summons ever, Niji snarked. He was getting irritable, not used to being outlasted. He knew that he was almost out of chakra, and though the chakra flow in his opponent was chaotic and strangely corrupted, he still had more than enough chakra for a few more techniques. Gamariki sniffed. Yeah, you're rude, Spider-chan. I know what to do, I'll kiss you and make it better. As both shinobi looked on horrified, the toad leapt through the webbing Kidamaru had hastily erected, reaching down to bind Kidamaru with his tongue. Whip of love! As Kidamaru struggled vainly in his bindings, Gamariki hauled him in before pressing a sloppy kiss to the face of a struggling Kidamaru. Genjutsu kiss! Kidamaru, still in his second stage transformation, froze for a moment before a look of utter terror crossed his face, and he keeled over. Niji looked on with wide eyes. Finally getting over his shock, Niji vaulted over Gamariki's head, leaning down near Kidamaru, who was now whimpering. Well, this was not how I expected this to end, Niji said lightly, before picking up one of the golden kunai lying scattered on the ground. So long, Kidamaru-san. The kunai came down in an arc across Kidamaru's exposed throat, and blood sprayed across the clearing. Niji stared at the bleeding corpse blankly, before he turned his back and walked towards Gamariki. Looking at Gamariki, who was staring at him in surprise, Niji shrugged. What? We're in no position to take prisoners. Slowly, Gamariki's expression turned to subtle approval, before he spoke in a gruff voice, patting Niji on the back with one webbed foot. Good for you, kid. Most people don't get that mature until it's too late. Well, we can't all be children, can we? Gamariki chuckled. That we can't. Hop on, kid. One of your friends seemed to be in a spot of trouble. Niji clambered up the toad's neck, settling just above its lurid bow as the toad hopped out of the clearing. On the floor, the corpse of Kidamaru, still in its transformed state, bled on to the forest floor. What the hell happened here? The Hokage entourage had been heading for the nearest chakra source, only to come across a wasteland. Tsunade, who had dropped to a crouch, was looking at the pierced corpse clinically. Shizune, behind her, was hovering behind her in obvious worry. Two masked ANBU members stood off to a side, scanning for any potential threats while Kakashi leaned against a nearby tree, watching the proceedings lazily. Asuma, who had been the one to ask the question, was staring at the destruction with his cigarette hanging limply, threatening to set fire to his beard. Kakashi was the one to answer him. Looking at the scuff marks and the footprints, there were two separate battles here, though it seems as if the first was much more destructive than the first. Asuma gestured at the corpse. So I guess he died in the second fight? Tsunade spoke, checking over the corpse. Large piercing wounds through the mouth, heart and stomach were done simultaneously. They were the cause of death. In addition, the corpse has a multitude of small lacerations. All seem to be made from a large, sharp blade-like object, and a large gash in the abdomen area, also consistent with a large blade. Also, one of the hands seems strangely deformed. There are signs of a cursed seal on the corpse. Kakashi took up the explanation. 3 groups have left the clearing, all heading in roughly the same direction. The first consisted of 3 people, one carrying a heavy object, judging by the depth of the impression, with an additional trail following immediately afterwards. The second group consisted of 5 shinobi, in a lisped linear formation. The last consisted of a single wounded shinobi, and the tracks head slightly more to the west than the others, leaving this clearing approximately 20 minutes ago. Judging by the whirlpool indent in the shoeprints, and the scrap of bloodied orange fabric in that tree over there, here Kakashi pointed at tree in question, which had a scrap of orange fabric dyed red in places with blood tied to one of the lower boughs. The lone shinobi is Naruto. Shizune looked at Kakashi, shocked. Surely you don't mean... Tsunade stood up, finished with the field autopsy. This is Naruto's kill. There are traces of Kyubi chakra in the smaller wounds and in the death blows, and in substantial quantities in the gash across the right side of the abdomen. Looking around the clearing, which was full of displaced boulders, large craters, and splatters of blood, Tsunade continued grimly. And it looks like he didn't get away unscathed from the exchange, especially with the Kyubi chakra blanketing the area. The ANBU to the right decided to join in the conversation. Hokage-sama, which trail should we follow? Tsunade sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose as she looked at the trails. Finally she answered. We will follow Naruto's tracks. Either he is lying a short distance away, which could mean he needs immediate attention, or he will have joined up with the others at some point. The ANBU tried to protest. But, Tsunade-sama, the immediate retrieval is more important. Silence! Tsunade thundered, turning to glare at the ANBU in question. The well-being of Konoha's Jinchuriki takes precedence over that of the traitorous Uchiha. Kakashi-san, how long to catch up with him? He had his normal speed, and he is delayed by further fights. I would say in about 15 minutes at Jounin speeds, but factoring in possible wounds and any QB enhancements, I'll say about 25, just to be safe. Tsunade straightened up, even as Asuma whistled in surprise. Then we'll have to move quickly. The sound border is only 20 minutes away. Let's go. I don't think I can bear the feel of the QB chakra much longer. In a blur, all the Jounin exited the clearing, heading for the hostile border of sound. Sasuke! Naruto yelled as he finally came into sight of the fleeing Uchiha, the yell coming out as a growl as he chased him. Ignoring him for the time being, Sasuke sprinted out of the forest, which abruptly gave way to the deep stone cliffs that formed the Valley of the End, a landmark of Konoha that had stood from the start of the Nidame's reign. It also served as the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rice Paddies. Vaulting over the head of Hashirama's statue that adorned Konoha's border at the waterfall, Sasuke landed on his ancestor's head before finally turning to face Naruto. So you finally caught up, Dobe. Looks like we have some unfinished business, don't we? Naruto slowly jogged up the Hashirama statue before jumping down to Hashirama's outstretched hand, where he doubled over, panting. You've got to be kidding me, team, he wheezed, looking incredulously at Sasuke. You came to the Valley of the End to have a standoff against me? While I'm flattered you think I'm as good as the first Hokage, I don't think your ancestor would be pleased, do you? Sasuke scowled, before leaping down on top of Madara's hand, glaring at Naruto through a pair of spinning Sharingan. Talking isn't going to help you now, Dobe, Sasuke gloated, an insane glint in his eye. I'm going to kill you now, then I will gain the power to kill my brother. Naruto stared at him, before straightening up, staring at Sasuke's eyes. He could feel Sasuke bristle, all the way across the valley. Staring into their eyes during battle was the worst insult you could do to an Uchiha, as it said you disregarded their eye prowess. Looking at Sasuke through blood-caked crimson locks, Naruto spoke. This is the last chance to turn back, Uchiha. Surrender and come quietly. You never learn, do you, Dobe? Sasuke scoffed. Such presumption, to think you could ever beat an Uchiha. But I won't stop you from trying, your attempts only benefit me. Well then, we've reached an impasse, haven't we? Naruto inquired as his hand slipped into his kunai pouch, one of the few things to have survived the earlier battles. Pushing his blood-soaked hair from his eyes with his other, he looked at Sasuke with an unreadable expression. As a last favor for my ex-teammate, I'll give you one last piece of advice, team, in the unlikely event you leave this alive. He held up one hand, stopping Sasuke from charging. Don't let hate consume you, you'll just die poorer for it. Then, with a grunt of effort, 3 chains burst from his back, and with them waving behind him, he gestured to the suddenly enraged Sasuke. Come, Uchiha Sasuke. Let's battle. Sasuke met Naruto in midair, kunai clashing as they tried to overpower each other. As Sasuke attempted to dislodge Naruto with a kick, Naruto pushed away, pivoting using his chains as he drove a fist to Sasuke's knee with an audible crack. Gritting his teeth, Sasuke retaliated, catching the retreating fist, using it to wrench Naruto in the opposite direction as they both landed roughly on the faces of the statues, clinging with chakra. Splinters flew from the statues at their landing, as they stared at each other, crimson slits staring into crimson eyes with a pair of black tomo on each eye. Then they were back at each other, kunai clashing against kunai as they sought to overpower each other, engaging in a fearsome taijutsu bout while defending themselves from the other's kunai. Naruto, tethered by a pair of chakra chains to the statues, was staying relatively still, never offering the first blow while using the chains to maneuver in midair. Mito had explained earlier that Uchiha taijutsu relied on counterstrikes, therefore making them make the first move seriously hampered their choices. Meanwhile Sasuke was flitting around him, trying to puncture Naruto's defense with his superior speed. What? Naruto ducked under a deceptively fast kunai to the throat. The hell, using his chains to pull himself above a potentially crippling jab to the abdomen. Naruto somersaulted, driving a double kick towards the Uchiha's face, who curled around the attack before using one of Naruto's chains to leap above Naruto. Are these infernal chains, Dobe? Deflecting a stray kunai with a flick of his chain, Naruto pulled himself onto Hashirama's stone face, as Sasuke landed opposite him. Well, it's just a little trick I learned recently, team. Grinning sadistically, he took another kunai in a reverse grip, double-wielding them as his chains twirled around him. Care to try again, team? It looks to me like you're losing your edge. As soon as he stopped talking, Naruto let go of his grip on the statue, free-falling as a blast of fire zoomed overhead from Sasuke's Kokkaku no Jutsu. As he fell parallel to the waterfall using his chains to slow himself, Sasuke followed, forming more hand seals as he fell. Katan, Hausenka no Jutsu. A multitude of fireballs sprayed from Sasuke's mouth, heading towards Naruto. Twisting in midair, Naruto dived into the pool at the foot of the statues in order to avoid the fireballs, while a trailing chain slammed into Sasuke's side, throwing him harshly onto the stone feet of the Madara statue. Staggering, Sasuke slowly stood, holding his ribs tenderly where the chain had gripped him, a dark spot forming on his shirt as blood leaked through. However, he was smirking. Naruto shot up from the bottom of the pool, leaping over the water and landing on it, facing Sasuke. Fresh blood leaked from a half-cauterized cut and his face received from shuriken hidden in the miniature fireballs, before the wound steamed and sealed shut. Naruto smirked as he balanced on the water, having lost his kunai in the exchange. "You'll have to do better than that, team, if you want to kill me." Yelling in rage, Sasuke threw a volley of shuriken at Naruto, running at him in their wake. Then one of the chains had batted away the incoming shuriken, and there were half a dozen Naruto clones charging him. Ducking under simultaneous kicks from opposite sides to his head, he tried to sweep the legs off the nearest clones. Then a third clone was bringing his leg down in a heel drop, forcing Sasuke to twist away from the attack, retreating to relative safety. His hand dipping briefly into his supply pouch, Sasuke sprinted around the Naruto clones, occasionally throwing a shuriken at the group, but they were all deflected by the clones as they stood their ground. Then all the clones were pulled together by invisible wires attached to each shuriken, and with a devious smirk, Sasuke held the other end of the ninja wire to his lips. Katan, Ryuka no Jutsu. When the flame reached the captured clones, they dispelled in a burst of chakra smoke, just as Sasuke's ankles were grabbed from underwater, pulling him in. Using the sinking Sasuke as a support, Naruto leapt up, driving Sasuke further down in the process, before he vaulted onto the feet of the Hashirama statue, waiting for Sasuke to resurface. Then Sasuke leapt out of the water onto the statue of Madara, glaring at Naruto as water dripped from his body in a cascade. His teeth clenched, Sasuke reached for the shoulder, before black seal markings spread from beneath his fingers, racing across his body. His eyes were now fixed on Naruto, glittering with an inner madness that startled Naruto, as Sasuke cupped one hand in the other in preparation of a technique. Sasuke had always been rather close to the edge psychologically, but it was proving to be a completely different thing to actually witness him going off the deep end, for Sasuke was indeed broken. There was no longer any glimmer of intelligence in the swirling Sharingan, just anger and the desperation of a caged beast. He had no option now, even if he desired it. Sasuke would either be killed, or he would be killed by Sasuke. The pool lit up an iridescent blue as lightning-natured chakra began to flicker across the fingers of Sasuke's outstretched hand, and a manic grin spread across his face. Chidori! In the next instant, Sasuke was speeding towards Naruto, a lightning-encrusted knife hand speeding towards his face as he dodged Naruto's flailing chains. Leaping over a swinging chain, Sasuke's Chidori cut through the last chain just as Naruto tried to swerve around the incoming jab. With a screech of lightning discharge, the Chidori buried itself deep into Naruto's shoulder. Naruto let out a strangled yell as the electricity surged through his body, before another chain burst through his navel, shooting into and through Sasuke's abdomen as it threw him off his feet and into the statue. There was silence for a moment, which was broken in an instant as both fighters crumpled onto their respective statues, blood seeping from their wounds. Naruto's chains dissolved as he couldn't muster the necessary concentration to manifest them, and he screamed hoarsely as red, viscous chakra coursed up his shoulder, which was bleeding profusely. On the other statue, Sasuke had collapsed, fingers grasping onto the puncture hole caused by Naruto's chain as he writhed in agony. With a guttural groan from Sasuke, his curse seal flared again as the markings started to spread onto the unaltered skin, the already affected features bubbling in its wake. Sasuke was becoming bulkier, muscle mass increasing as his skin took on an unnatural grayish shade, and his hair extended and became blue-gray. With a spurt of blood, hand-like appendages burst from his shoulder blades to hover behind him, and the scara taking on a dull gray color as his puncture wound healed. A blackish shuriken marking appeared on his face as Sasuke got up, his leathery appendages making small movements as he tested them. At the other side, red chakra was coalescing at the Chidori wound, before it spread in a cloak over Naruto's body. His hair was rising in a non-existent breeze, crimson locks separating into 9 spiky protrusions which waved behind his head as his canines extended and his whisker marks gouged deeper into his face. The cloak bubbled, forming 3 tails and a pair of canine ears in the cloak as Naruto settled into a 4-legged crouch, Kyuubi chakra scorching the rock below him as a pair of black-veined crimson eyes observed the creature in front of them. A raspy chuckle escaped the throat of the cubified Naruto, as he looked at the transformed Sasuke. "Team, I never took you for a drag queen." Then a somber look passed across his face. Just look at yourself, Sasuke, willing to give up your independence, your humanity for a sliver of power that you won't even get to enjoy. Are you really that shallow, to become a monster for a chance to fulfill a dream? Take it from someone on the other side, team. Very few survive being a monster with their humanity intact, and those that do never chose their fate. Sasuke did not respond, snarling at Naruto, the overlarge hand-like appendages flapping behind him. Dirty purple chakra rippled above his skin as he crouched, Sharingan flaring back into life, 6 tomos swimming in the dark crimson pools. Naruto's QB tail constructs were suddenly pierced through with his chains, only they were now crimson in color, matching his chakra cloak and his eyes, with deep black veins running throughout their length. They also seemed to be aflame, a reddish transparent flame coating each chain link. Eyes flashing, Naruto gave Sasuke a taunting grin. Come on then, team. Let's see what being the slave of Snakeface got the last Uchiha. With an enraged roar, Sasuke ran towards Naruto, the claws and the appendages protruding from his shoulder blades poised to attack and his hands running through hand seals. Inhaling, Sasuke breathed a torrent of fire at Naruto, who simply smirked as he ran headfirst into the conflagration. Suddenly, from within the fireball, a flaming chain arced out towards Sasuke, puncturing through the leather webbing in his wings, burning it as it tore through effortlessly, leaving Sasuke pinned. Following the chain, Naruto emerged from the fire, completely unharmed as he ran towards a trapped Sasuke, a glowing crimson ball of chakra in his hand, leaving swirling and turning air currents in its wake. Sasuke countered by creating another Chidori, colored black by the corrupted chakra. Rasengan! Chidori! A hunched figure slowly made its way down a darkened corridor, leaning on a walking stick, towards a set of oak doors. 2 people walked behind the figure, both talking in heated tones. Danzo, this step is unprecedented. We won't simply be able to undo what you're going to do. Danzo chuckled grimly, looking back at the Hokage's advisors. I realize that, Koharu, he said quietly, his good eye squinting at the wizened figure of the female advisor and teammate of the 3rd Hokage. However, we can't allow the mistakes of Sarutobi to continue. For all her bluster, Tsunadeheim is still too soft to take the necessary decisions. Hamura spoke, his gaze fixed on the root leader. Danzo, we've gone along with your plans because they have been for the good of Konoha. But what you're trying to do, it could destabilize everything. We're not in a position to enter a war, surely you realize that. Danzo simply smirked. On the contrary, Suna is not prepared for war. My root can easily disrupt what little resistance Suna can muster. Kohara looked at Danzo, protesting. But attacking Suna in their home territory, that's suicide. I will not allow you to send any more of our forces to their deaths for no gain. We don't have enough forces for the stalemate this is going to become, Danzo, and mark my words, this is going to end up destroying both Suna and Konoha. Danzo stared back at Koharu. Don't be so quick to decide, Koharu. We simply need the upper hand in the surrender. Once we have them within our grasp, we can make sure they never try something like this again. Tsunadeheim was going to make our treaty more favorable for Suna, he gritted his teeth. I will never allow that to happen, not while I live. I lost my arm in the wars to get us that deal. Hamura looked at Danzo, surprised. You mean you're doing this for personal revenge? This is going to weaken both our countries, Danzo. The lack of war between our 2 countries is the only thing that's stopping Inoki from an outright invasion. Surely you see that? What you're going to do, it could lead to another shinobi world war. Danzo grunted. Nevertheless, Suna can't get out of betraying us without any repercussions, like Tsunadeheim would have us do. Koharu grimaced. Then I'm sorry, old friend, but I cannot support you in this attempt. I will not be party to creating world war. Good luck getting the approval without our support. Danzo gave a sinister chuckle as he passed through the oak doors, entering the council chambers. You'll be surprised, old friend. You'll be surprised. I bloody well hope I appreciate what I'm doing, Naruto grumbled as he dipped his finger into a small pot containing a thick crimson liquid, which he was using to draw patterns on a translucent body placed on a stone slab. And damn, that was confusing. Why can't the bloody original be the clone for once? The woman lying on the slab gave a pained snort. The Naruto clone gave it an annoyed look. Oh, shut up, ghost lady. Your lucky boss had already had me created for some time when you decided to get yourself blown up. Mito gave it a withering glare, accompanied by a much less friendly snort. The Naruto clone stared back, looking decidedly unimpressed. Well, you did. I wonder how you survived to be ancient, ghost lady, if you're so damn careless. A hint of a grin blossomed on the Naruto clone's face as Mito grunted in indignation at the old comment. Well, you are ancient, ghost lady. Anyway, Be glad I am here for you to go all vampire on. Mito sniffed, as the Naruto clone continued drawing the blood seal on her forehead, this time with a definite smirk playing around his lips. Whatever you say, ghost lady. You're still going to absorb all my chakra when I commit glorified suicide by activating a seal I drew that I barely understood enough to draw. I still can't figure out half the arrays, Mito gurgled, before speaking in a raspy whisper. Naruto-kun, it isn't like I can get the chakra from the regular source. You know, I'm pretty sure my seal's been completely torched by the QB chakra by now. Suddenly the whining sound of disturbed wind and the crackle of lightning filled the air, obvious over the muted explosions before. The Naruto clone looked in the direction of the sound, startled. Damn, that's not good, he muttered to himself as he started to draw the symbols hurriedly. If I'm already using the Rasengan, and the team is already using the Chidori, I don't have much time. Looking at Mito, who looked ready to comment, he hurriedly added, and you, don't talk. Really, one would think having your throat sliced by a splinter would discourage chatter. Mito glared back mutinously, which the Naruto clone ignored, instead concentrating on painting the final sealing array. Wiping away the sweat on his brow, he sighed. I swear, I always pawn this sort of job on me. Well, I suppose it's time. Running through a series of hand seals, he slammed one hand on Mito's forehead and the other on his own chest, which had a corresponding blood seal inscribed. Sealing art, chakra vampire seal. The blood lit up a bright white, then Mito's wounds began to seal shut as the Naruto clone seemed to lose color, mass flowing down his outstretched hand into Mito. The Naruto clone gave Mito a cheeky grin, opening his mouth to make a final comment, when the earth trembled, accompanied by a giant explosion. Startled, Mito half sat up in alarm. What was that? The Naruto clone, looking distinctively less solid, wordlessly stared back at her, then doubled over, clutching at his stomach. The world went dark as a pillar of darkness shot up from the Valley of the End, and the Naruto clone yelled out in pain, a glowing light shining from under the remains of his jacket. Hurrying towards the screaming clone, Mito unceremoniously pulled away his jacket and shirt, bearing the seal, which was glowing a sinister orange. Before her startled gaze, the seal pulsed, before the kanji for death superimposed itself on top of the swirl of the original seal in an eerily shining black. Rearing back, Sasuke drove his black lightning-encrusted fist forward, aiming at Naruto's heart. Naruto's crimson Rasengan came forward to meet it, before the two jutsu met in an ominous crash of lightning and raw chakra. Lightning arced out from the collision, shocking both, before suddenly the Chidori glanced off the Rasengan, and the two jutsu hit home. Naruto's Rasengan caught Sasuke on the shoulder, and it dug into it, grinding past bone and severing the hand from the body. The Chidori, however, continued uninterrupted on its path, entering Naruto's body through his chest and exiting through his back, puncturing his heart in the middle. There was a shocked silence. Both looked at each other, not believing what had happened. Then Sasuke fell backwards, the stump of his arm spewing blood, while Naruto crumpled where he stood, Sasuke's disembodied arm still sticking out of his chest. Sasuke let out an ear-piercing scream as he clutched at his ruined shoulder, his cursed seal's influence causing the open wound to bubble, even as it continued to spurt blood. Naruto collapsed face down, his weight crushing the arm beneath, Sasuke's fingers poking out between his shoulder blades. Naruto's Kyuubi cloak pulsed, before it contracted into a layer surrounding Naruto, who looked to have lost consciousness. Black smoke started billowing from Naruto's crumpled figure, before otherworldly pressure descended on the valley. The roar of the waterfall was suddenly muted, and the pool's water began to recede around him as Naruto began to slowly levitate, carried by the smoke. His hair was flaring behind him as he rose, and the pain-addled eyes of Sasuke stared in disbelief as he struggled to escape the unrelenting pressure in the clearing. With a sickening squelch, Sasuke's arm fell out of Naruto's body, leaving a gaping wound through Naruto's sternum. The destroyed heart was clearly visible. However, no blood was flowing. Naruto seemed to have been frozen in time as he rose higher into the air. Finally, when he was about 6 feet in the air, he stopped rising, instead hovering in the air. Without any warning whatsoever, Naruto's jacket and shirt disintegrated, showing off his Jinchuriki seal, which glowed an eerie pulsing crimson. Then it seemed to crack. Suddenly, the skin surrounding the seal began to turn an ugly blue-gray color as a miasma of a white gelatinous substance grew in its wake, covering Naruto like a cloak. When the blue-gray skin reached Naruto's head, his eyes popped open, and he let out a tortured scream as the discolored skin covered his face. His hair seemingly bleached from the roots outwards while still flared outwards, till his hair was colored a bone white. His eyes were rolling to the back of his sockets, his eyes colored a soulless black as they stared unseeingly. With an ominous scraping noise, as if someone was carving it in, The kanji for death slowly carved itself over the swirl of the original seal in a pitch-black ink that shined eerily. As it finished, Naruto gave a last agonized scream before he hung limp, still in the air. The surrounding scene pulsed. A beam of black burst out from his body, shooting upwards, as large constructs shaped like prayer beads made from the same gelatinous substance covering him burst out from his unconscious form, anchoring him in the air and wrapping around the thrashing Sasuke. He was floating. Sinking. Drowning. There was a hot poker pressing against his stomach, lava flowing up his body, scorching his skin. There was something missing from his chest. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't move. He heard a raw voice screaming in agony, hurting his ears by the volume, before he realized that he was the one screaming, that the screams of agony were coming from his own mouth, but he couldn't stop. So he continued to scream, even as he coughed up blood, even as the act of screaming itself hurt him enough to make him want to scream all over again. Dimly, he registered a new source of hurt, almost lost within the pains racking his body, an insistent itch, half pain and half irritation, that grazed his stomach as it traced an unfamiliar pattern on his skin. However, he realized quite acutely when it had ended, for as soon as the itch had stopped, a blinding pain had blossomed in his head, the angry pain of an acute migraine making itself felt even beyond the pains of a quite wrecked body, and then suddenly it was all gone. The sudden lack of pain hit him hard. It was like a sudden sense of vertigo. He felt sick. With a whimper, Naruto curled up on himself. Slowly, when the shock had faded somewhat, and reason had reasserted itself, Naruto tried to take stock of his surroundings. He was lying on scorched earth, and it seemed as if he had none of the wounds that he had been inflicted with. He was in some sort of building, that much was clear. It was a hall of some sort, with white walls and some sort of throne at one end on an elevated stage, facing a set of well-worn cushions, colored a bone white. A rumbling chuckle behind him caused him to suddenly turn around, only to come face to face with a monstrous figure. It was humanoid, only it was about 15 feet tall, and it had blue-gray skin, with a bone-white mane of hair flaring out behind him. Its beady black eyes were staring at Naruto with a look of predatory amusement. Naruto gulped. Whatever was going to happen, Naruto had a feeling it was not going to be good for his health. My Ningen. Aren't you an interesting one? Naruto swallowed a lump in his throat. Something told him that acting brashly right now would not be wise. The creature, whatever it was, just had that aura of power that said not to mess with it. Now what had Iruka-sensei told him to do when meeting a possible noble? The creature chuckled. While it is interesting to listen to your thoughts, Uzumaki Naruto, he emphasized the name, and Naruto swallowed reflexively. My time is not without value. I am the Shinigami, and you have been brought here because you have attempted to use my power, and it intrigues me as to how that is possible, especially seeing as I have no contract with you. The Shinigami? Oh, damn it all, he was screwed. But how would he have used the power of the death god? Naruto was not someone who considered himself spiritually enlightened, even though certain knowledge was required in sealing, and the only reason he had even heard of the particular arcane deity was oh, hell. The Shinigami suddenly laughed, a booming laugh, echoing throughout the chamber. Quite literally, little Ningen. Still chuckling, he added, and of course, the seal. I forgot how I helped that strange blonde to seal Kurama. Even in the midst of freaking out over his very possible disintegration at the hands of a deity, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little insulted for his father. Strange blonde. It was not as if having an infestation of bone-white hair and blue-gray skin were exactly normal. The Shinigami grunted. If you wish to present a good impression, you are failing miserably, Ningen. Infestation of hair, indeed. Finally something caught his notice, and Naruto went rigid. Shinigami-sama, are you reading my thoughts? Obviously. The Shinigami seemed slightly annoyed that Naruto had even asked, so Naruto supposed that it was considered a right by the gods. Then again, he was probably listening into this conversation as well. Of course, Ningen. By the way, I said as much at the beginning of this conversation. Well, what did you know? It was true. Though he could be excused, Naruto thought, as he was still getting over the fact that he was meeting with the Shinigami. Oh, he was really going to be screwed if he didn't talk his way out of this. But how? Looking at the deity, Naruto began to babble. Shinigami-sama, about using your power, you see, my Kekkei Genkai allows me to channel any seal in my body. It's just, your seal got exposed recently when I underwent some changes. I swear I didn't mean to. So since it's not really my fault, I can go now, right? He winced, waiting for something to happen. The Shinigami stared at him, a look of intrigue on his face. What to do, he pondered aloud, seemingly more for Naruto's benefit than his own. What to do, indeed. I suppose it is my fault in a way, putting a seal on you, isn't it, Nigen? However, I can't simply let you use my power with impunity. That would just set a bad example. I can't simply remove your seal, not when I was honor-bound to make that seal in the first place. So what am I going to do with you? Idly scratching his chin with the dagger that he was grasping in one hand, the Shinigami stared at Naruto ponderingly, while Naruto did his best to blend into the ground. Then he smirked. Naruto repressed his flinch. He didn't want to appear intimidated in front of the deity, even though it probably knew it already. Well, why not? It should be interesting to see, if nothing else. Suddenly the Shinigami was in front of Naruto, staring into his eyes with a serious gaze. Well, Nigen, I've decided to let you go for this particular offense. Naruto's sigh was audible, but the smirk on the face of the deity soon had Naruto freezing in fear. What sort of trap was the deity weaving? With a leisurely wave of his spindly arm, the Shinigami continued, other than, of course, the natural consequence of channeling my power in a human body. But you expected that already, didn't you? Naruto nervously cleared his throat, before addressing the Shinigami, who was squatting in front of him, peering into his face with a disturbing grin on his face. Excuse me, Shinigami-sama, but exactly what consequences? The Shinigami gave a careless shrug. Oh, that's nothing. It's just that my power strains your life force. When a mortal such as you uses it, I'll say you'll lose about 5 years. Life force for this stunt. But then, sealing such a large soul is no easy task, is it? 5 years of his life. Though he supposed it wasn't much, and he was a ninja from a clan said to have an average life expectancy of 200 years, in a profession with an average life expectancy of 30. So perhaps the fact that those extra years could end up helping him, instead of just getting wasted, was a good thing? However, Shinigami-sama, what did you mean seal a soul? A chuckle was the only reply he received, before he felt a sudden pulling sensation. Looking down, he could see his wounds, trophies of his recent battles, appear on his body accompanied with an ever unwelcome sensation of pain. That was a shame. He really had enjoyed not feeling like his organs were liquefying on him. Then he was getting more insubstantial, and the surroundings were getting darker. The last thing he saw before darkness enveloped him was the Shinigami's face peering into his own, an oddly proud look on his face. Then everything was gone, leaving him alone with the pain, and the last words of the Shinigami echoing in his mind. It's time for you to go back, Nigen, and remember this, everything has consequences. Power flooded Mito's body as the clones suddenly dispersed. It was a heady feeling, the replenishing of the pitiful chakra reserves of her chakra shell overflowing and leaving a tingly sensation in her body. However, she could not, waste any time to enjoy the sensations. The agonized expression on the clone's face just prior to its dispersal had stuck with her, as well as the kanji that had appeared over the Shiki Fujin. It was rather obvious that her worst fears had come to pass. Naruto had accessed the Shinigami's seal, actually channeled the power of a god. It was something that every Fuinjutsu user had nightmares about. What Naruto had done was certainly not unique. No, channeling the power of various arcane deities was an integral part of Fuinjutsu. But there was a difference between channeling the power through entreating to the higher powers, and manipulating the power of the deities themselves, one that many ancient Fuinjutsu pioneers had found, to their horror. Stealing from a deity was a sure-fire way to attract their wrath, and many childhood fables Mito had heard during her childhood had included those men who had tried to steal the power of a god, and what befell them. Still, perhaps the fact that he had not intended to use a god's power would keep him alive. That was the only sliver of hope that Mito had, as she raced towards Naruto. Not caring of her own still sizzling wounds, she made her way out of the forest to the valley of the end. Leaping on top of the statue of her deceased husband, Mito paused in shock. What was in front of her was a wasteland, that much was obvious. The battle-cratered ground, which had already seen one of the most destructive fights in shinobi history, was pockmarked and littered with brand new craters from the latest conflict. The statues, both of her husband and of Madara, were crumbling from the repeated impacts they had received. Mito noticed, with an irrational burst of pride, that most had been caused by Naruto's chains, judging from the gouges in the stonework. Within this scene of raw destruction, however, there was an extremely unnatural phenomenon in action. Near the foot of the Madara statue, there was an area of the pool from which the water had receded in a neat circle, exposing the wet stone bottom, a severed and bleeding arm resting on it. And at its epicenter, floating around 3 meters above water level, was a transformed Naruto who looked to be quite unconscious. His bone-white hair was flaring behind him, and his blue-gray pigmented skin emphasized the crimson glowing seal on his abdomen as he floated in place. A chakra construct resembling a set of praying beads had erupted from the center of the seal to wrap around a feebly struggling Sasuke. Even as she leapt down off the statue, she could see the prayer bead structures pulsing sinisterly as they tightened further, trapping Sasuke within them. The beads then began to emit a violent white glow, before the beads separated from the body, hovering in the air with a screaming wraith of Sasuke which had separated from the material body held between them. Mito approached as close as she dared, but being merely a chakra construct herself she couldn't risk getting closer, not without risking destabilization. While she may have made her body rather durable, she had not expected her body to be exposed to divine power, and she instinctively knew that her body would come off worse in that particular exchange. Therefore she was stuck, powerless, until whatever happened with the seal subsided and she could reach Naruto, who looked to have reached well past the point of almost dead already. Finally, with a sigh of displaced air, the wraith-like Sasuke was completely absorbed into the prayer beads, which then floated back to the airborne Naruto, sunk into his body, and disappeared. Sasuke flopped lifelessly to the ground, a complex seal forming on his stomach. The cursed seal flared a final time, before it dispersed with an audible crack, leaving Sasuke's still body lying on the stone feet of his ancestor's statue. Meanwhile, Mito was trying to restrain herself from running forward when Naruto's eyes snapped open, even as Naruto's hair and skin began to turn back to their original shades. However, despite the hole in his chest finally sealing over as the Kyuubi chakra asserted itself, Naruto was steadily losing color, an unhealthy pallor visible in his face making the whisker marks stand out. By the time he floated down, slowly landing on the water that had come rushing back, his hair was bleaching again and his skin turning flaky from ill health. Across the Shiki Fujin, surrounding the spiral seal and the death kanji, 3 tomo materialized. An outline of the Sharingan briefly manifested in Naruto's pitch-black eyes, before the design shattered and revealed normal blue. With a Naruto slumped as he slipped back into unconsciousness. Shaking herself out of her stupor, Mito started towards Naruto, before she was roughly pushed out of the way as a blonde and green blur sped past her. A second later, Tsunade's entourage flew past her as the Hokage's panicked cry was heard. Naruto! Well, this is just perfect, Shikamaru thought sarcastically as lured Taiya back into the trees, hoping to ensnare her in his shadow. Now it was getting simply ridiculous. Even after taking a chakra pill, his chakra levels were just above exhaustion, and combined with the physical fatigue caused by the strange jutsu that her summons had used, he was ready to collapse. It was not that Taiya did not get caught. While quite analytical, Shikamaru had managed to catch her in a trap quite a few times. However, each time she had been in actual danger, she would just break out of the trap with her ridiculous strength, forcing him back on the defensive. As she pursued him into a grove in the woods, Shikamaru set his jaw as he prepared for the final part of the trap. In stark contrast to his other traps, Shikamaru had, due to necessity, gone for the kill this time. Shikamaru, like many of the other rookie 9, had not killed until now. The only ones he knew to have killed were Shino, Kiba and Ino. However, unlike the others, it was not by accident, shielding by his sensei, or even a dislike for killing that kept Shikamaru from killing his opponents. He had a much more unimpressive reason for that. He simply didn't want to be forced into the counseling that every shinobi had to undergo after their first kill, especially since he would probably be appointed to Ino's dad, who was the only person other than Ino and his mother that terrified him. Now, thanks to the Uchiha, he would have to sit for hours he could spend cloud watching inside the stuffy Yamanaka home, listening to Ino's dad go on and on about his feelings about killing while staring unblinkingly at him. Or he would die, at the hands of a girl no less. Neither option really appealed to him. Why did they make him a chunin anyway? All this was just troublesome. Kneeling in the shadow of a giant tree trunk, Shikamaru sighed mournfully as he slowly weaved through the hand seals for one of the shadow manipulation jutsu unique to his clan. Taiya was slowly advancing, taunting him as she entered the grove opposite the tree he was hiding behind. The grove in question was ringed by 6 equally massive trees forming a hexagon, their treetops forming enormous shadows under them. From the direction facing Taiya as she entered the clearing, each of the trees looked perfectly normal, if rather abnormally large. In the direction facing away from the grove, however, each tree had a sizzling seal tag placed at knee height. It was time. As Shikamaru finished his hand seal sequence, holding his hands in the rat seal, his shadow merged with the tree in front of it, before a tendril of shadow sneaked out on either side to merge with the next tree in the circle. Soon the shadows had formed a ring around the grove containing Taiya, just as he had planned. The flare tags were bound to detonate any second now, which was when his biggest gamble to date. The jutsu he was attempting to use was traditionally done with kunai, and needed a far larger amount of chakra, one of the few true finishing moves in Nara's arsenal. His grasp of the technique was fairly elementary though, which was why he was relying on the trees, which was a far larger and more stable shadow anchor than a thrown kunai. He was also relying on the flare tags he had attached to the other side of the trees to help channel the shadows in a fairly linear path, for existing shadow movements less than chakra requirement, and he was pretty sure he would have come up short on chakra otherwise. Finally, Taiyuya reached the very center of the grove just as the flare tags detonated, throwing 6 enormous shadows of the trees into Taiyuya. Shikamaru grinned viciously as he ran through 2 more seals before holding his hand in the rat seal again. Shadow cage skewering. On hearing his voice, Taiyuya immediately tried to jump away, but she found herself immobilized as the first part of Shikamaru's jutsu activated, the shadows that the flares cast on her immobilizing and wrapping around her body. Even as Taiyuya was getting bound by the tree's shadows, the lines connecting the trees and the shadows on the ground bubbled sinisterly. With a sharp sound, thin skewers formed out of the shadow before they lanced into the trapped kunoichi, piercing her from every direction as they grew through her in a split second. With a muted sound, the shadows dissipated as Shikamaru ran out of chakra to maintain the jutsu. Stumbling out from behind the tree, he found himself staring into Taiyuya's eyes as she looked back at him, an expression of abject shock etched on her frozen features. She looked strangely unharmed, and for a split second Shikamaru descended into a mild panic, thinking she had survived, when she swayed unsteadily before she toppled over in a heap. Shikamaru could feel the onset of chakra exhaustion coming on, clouding his thoughts as his head grew increasingly heavy. However, his gaze refused to move from the crumpled figure in front of him as he stood staring at Taiyuya, observing everything from the dark skin and pink hair of her cursed seal form, to the extremely small wounds peppering her figure, slowly leaking rivulets of blood now escaping her still body. His eyes were fixed on the glazed eyes of his first kill staring back at him, even as he finally collapsed to his knees, the combination of exhaustion and chakra exhaustion taking their toll on him. Then his legs gave out completely and he was lying on the ground next to Taiyuya, staring at her wrist, which was adorned with a white tattoo of a spiral with its end flaring out that was standing out starkly on her dark skin. He could have sworn he had seen it somewhere before, but it was getting strangely tiring to think. A nap sounded good right about now. Thus it was that a rather bedraggled-looking Niji emerged from the forest, having had Gamariki dispelled some time ago, to find Shikamaru lying on the ground. Grumbling under his breath, Niji proceeded to hoist the unconscious genius over his shoulder, before leaving the clearing to search for the rest of his scattered team. On the ground, the white tattoo on Taiyuya's wrist suddenly lit up before fading into nothingness, unnoticed by Niji as he hurried to the other's aid. A few miles away, a specter of a long-dead woman suddenly looked in Taiyuya's direction, a puzzled look on her face, before she turned back to hovering over a still body lying near a waterfall, a puzzled frown on her face. On the forest floor, Taiyuya's body cooled, glazed eyes staring up at the canopy above. Tenten cursed fluently as she jumped back, holding onto her side which was leaking blood from a claw swipe that had gotten lucky. She really should have known better, she thought to herself angrily. Even armed with kunai and as gifted as she was with weapons, you did not enter into a close-range battle with an Inuzuka and expect to get away unscathed. Though it wasn't exactly an Inuzuka she was facing. From what she had noticed, the attack of the strange sound shinobi worked quite similarly to the Yamanaka mind techniques, minus the interrogation abilities. It was also quite different in its own way, being much more physical than the Yamanaka counterpart. Therefore what she was now facing was the same skilled shinobi as earlier, only he was in possession of the animalistic body of Kiba, thus she was forced on the defensive, unable to attack due to the fact that the person attacking her was doing so using her teammate's body. It didn't help that he seemed to have more skill with kunai than even she had. Cursing under her breath, Tenten reached behind her for one of the many weapon scrolls she carried. With a quick twist of her wrist and a puff of smoke, the weapon in the scroll unsealed and she caught it easily. Yukon grinned at her in amusement. A Johyu? You're really going to fight me with a Johyu? What are you, a Suna puppeteer? Tenten started to twirl the leaden weight around her, slowly building up momentum. This is all I need to bring you down, bastard. Yukon's mouth twitched as he settled into a stance, the constant twitching in a few limbs indicating that Kiba was still fighting for control. However, Tenten didn't hold up much hope for him driving the sound shinobi out without help. The Inuzuka had been quite low on chakra after his combination transformation. A sudden rustling in the bushes distracted both from their stare-off, and as they twisted around to identify the new threat, a salvo of kunai flew towards the Yukon-possessed Kiba. Even as he ducked under the kunai and leapt into the stream, a set of blurs exited the forest to surround Tenten. Tenten instinctively drew a kunai, before she looked into the faces of those who had surrounded her. Kakashi-san, Shizune-san! What are you doing here? Orochimaru-sama, are you all right? The young, soft voice of the bespectacled silver-haired boy was laced with worry. However, when the one addressed, a tall thin man wrapped in bandages, turned towards him, he instinctively straightened up, knowing that Orochimaru's rage was not to be taken slightly. After a moment, Orochimaru spoke, his voice a sibilant hiss. Ponderous and high-pitched, the voice was one that naturally inspired terror. However, it was evident that it was not something he consciously maintained. The man's very presence simply exuded a saturated killing intent in such volume that it was hard to think of the man without it. Silence, Kabuto. I shall rest. The body transfer is more tiring than I care to feel. With that, Orochimaru slowly lifted himself off of his chair, staggering upright with an obvious effort. Even then he staggered tiredly. Kabuto immediately rushed to his side, only to be roughly dissuaded from coming near. I can take care of myself, Kabuto. Orochimaru's voice carried the slightest hint of threat in it, making Kabuto hastily backtrack. Of course, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru turned round and slowly walked towards the open doorway, only to be halted by Kabuto again. Orochimaru-sama, what are you going to do about Uchiha Sasuke and the Sound 4? For a moment, there was silence. Then Orochimaru gave a dismissive shrug, resuming his walk as his words floated back to Kabuto accompanied by an amused chuckle. Sasuke-kun has 3 years to get here, Kabuto-kun. If you want, go pick him up. As for the Sound 4, he nonchalantly waved his hand as he stepped through the doorway, his whispered answer barely reaching Kabuto. Haven't you been asking for some test subjects? He's got extreme chakra exhaustion. He's going into shock. Steady, steady. Rabbit, give me the Hyarogen. Hyarogen, Hokage-sama? But his body. He's an Uzumaki. He can handle it. Tsunade and one of her ANBU were leaning over the limp and bloodied form of Naruto, while Mito hovered behind them. A few feet away, Asuma was lazily smoking a cigarette as he looked on as the Hokage frantically tried to treat Naruto, when a polite cough caught his attention. Looking up, he found himself looking into ghoulish black eyes peering at him through the slits in an ANBU mask, mere inches from his face. Ah! With a yell, Asuma stumbled back, cigarette falling from his lips, only to find the ANBU in question looking at him quizzically. Panting slightly, Asuma looked at the ANBU, bug-eyed from shock. Don't do that! The ANBU tilted his head slightly, before speaking in a monotone. Do what? That! This ANBU was a strange one, Asuma decided, now decidedly more interested in the somewhat unique specimen before him. Usually ANBU operated under the premise of being unseen and unheard. For a member of one of the most reclusive shinobi units to actually initiate conversation was decidedly strange. Looking more carefully at the ANBU in question, Asuma found him to be even more eccentric than what his introduction had made him out to be. For one, Asuma could make out a decidedly odd forehead protector protruding from under his cat mask which seemed to cover his jawline in a parody of the signature protector of the second. Also, his unblinking stare was somewhat unnerving. I'm afraid I don't understand you, Asuma-senpai. Asuma sighed. Never mind. This guy was definitely strange, but being in the ANBU did strange things to people, and this guy didn't seem to be that bad. After all, he could have turned out like Kakashi. Asuma shuddered at that thought. He liked Kakashi, he really did, but he didn't think Konoha could survive 2 of the eccentric shinobi. The ANBU cleared his throat. Asuma-senpai, why didn't you go with Kakashi-senpai? I thought your genin were in the group? He seemed honestly inquisitive. Asuma hesitated, before shrugging and deciding to answer. After all, it wasn't as if it was some big secret. Leaning into the stone statue and lighting up another cigarette, he slowly started to explain. That's because I know what they're up to, and anyway, I wouldn't want to add an emotional component to the mission. Besides, Shizune needed just one more ninja and I had a feeling Kakashi didn't need to see what had happened here. He looked at the bloodied ground, to the bloodless face of Naruto as Tsunade fussed over him and added under his breath, and I was right. The ANBU tilted his head inquisitively. You know what they're up to. Asuma smirked around his cigarette, looking at the sky. It's a tradition for the Ino Shikacho teams in Konoha, he explained. The latest team gets a set of seal-engraved earrings, an old heirloom of the clans, which use the Yamanaka's powers to psychically connect all members of the team, plus their sensei. What do? It's for increasing teamwork within the teams, and it's a fairly drastic step. Once you initiate the bond, it takes a long time to wean off of it, but that is not even the true danger. Once you put on the artifacts, there are literally no secrets within the team. It bears your innermost thoughts to each other. Asuma chuckled. As you can imagine, it causes some quite amusing scenarios. Thank goodness the bond with the sensei is much weaker than the ones between the team. I can only feel their general health. The ANBU stared at him. Asuma, feeling the intense stare, looked down, before his sweat dropped. You really have no idea of human behavior, do you? He muttered before continuing with a wry grin. Let's just say it was quite some time before Shikamaru or Chuchi could look at Sasuke without retching. Ah. The ANBU spoke, before he held up his hand in the classic inquisitive posture. I do not understand. Asuma's sweat dropped. Never mind, he said awkwardly. So anyway, Shika's gone and knocked himself out, but he's stable. And from the chakra levels, Chuji-kun has barely fought at all, so they're all right. Besides, the forest is now crawling with Konoha ninja. Sparing a glance at Naruto, he continued more somberly. And it isn't as if the enemy has many shinobi alive now. The ANBU nodded slightly, before speaking. His voice, Asuma noticed, was a very carefully structured monotone that revealed no tells to his inner thoughts. That in itself was a tell, however, as it told Asuma that this was a veteran ANBU, who had probably served on the force for quite some time. It was a subtle sign, but it was fairly easy to identify if you knew what to look for. Only a few operatives, such as Kakashi and Orochimaru, who had surpassed the veteran stage to legend, had ever truly managed to insert false emotional tells into conversation. Suddenly, the ANBU was even more interesting than before. Uzumaki-san has indeed been quite effective, Asuma snorted. Effective? The boy simply tore the enemy apart. I swear, I haven't seen carnage like that since Guy went on one of his youthful rampages in his wild days. Lost in his reminiscing, Asuma was brought back by the frantic waving of the ANBU. He blithely ignored the ridiculous sight of an ANBU acting like a schoolgirl. It was a skill you tended to pick up when hanging around the likes of Kakashi, or Guy, or Anko, or Genma, or Rado, or Ibiki. Asuma's sweat dropped. Maybe it was time to find some friends that weren't insane? Shaking his head, he looked at the panicking ANBU. What? The ANBU leaned towards him conspiringly, before whispering in a terrified whisper. Don't say the name. Huh! At Asuma's dumbfounded look, the ANBU started to explain hurriedly. The beast. The green beast. Don't say the name, it will come. Asuma stared at the panicking ANBU incredulously. Was the ANBU scared of Guy? Laughing under his breath, he was mocking the increasingly paranoid ANBU, who was jumping at every rustling leaf, when he detected an enormous chakra signature at the edge of his perception. Immediately his chakra blades were out and blazing with wind chakra, and wooden beams peeked out of the arm guards of the ANBU. Mokutan? Asuma filed that away for later. Could it be that he had talked with the elusive Mokutan no Tenzo? As they turned towards the chakra signature blazing towards them from the forest. Interestingly though, it was heading towards them from Konoha's direction. Tsunade-sama? Asuma called out. The Hokage grunted irritably, still working on the comatose patient lying below. Looking up briefly, she wiped sweat from her brow as she looked at Asuma seriously. I need at least 2 minutes more to stabilize Naruto. Hold them off, whoever they are. I don't want them anywhere near here before the 2 minutes are up. The ANBU looked at Asuma. Asuma nodded back, the wind chakra coating around his chakra blades flaring, as they settled into stances waiting for the unknown chakra signature to appear. The chakra was getting closer, and Asuma tensed, when a green blur burst out of the forest. Ducking the wood beams heading at him from the ANBU, the green blur skidded to a halt a few feet in front of Asuma. The ANBU yelped, Tsunade-sama, I bring most unyouthful news. A boisterous voice exclaimed, before the source turned to stare at the horrified ANBU. ANBU-san, that was very unyouthful, he said reproachfully. Perhaps I could interest you in a youthful spar later, to reignite your flames of youth? Asuma's eyebrows twitched, even as the ANBU gave him a wounded glare before skulking off to hide behind Tsunade. Guy, what are you doing here? Yukon Kiba stared at the newcomers critically. So the great Jounin of Konoha arrives, he snarked before he smirked. But if I were you, I wouldn't try to harm me. Well, if you don't want to kill your friend too. Kakashi slowly pushed up his forehead protector, uncovering his Sharingan. He stared at the possessed shinobi, before a small smirk of his own crept across his face. Akizichu. It's been quite some time since I've seen one of you. In fact, the last time I saw you was in the Third War. His smirk grew as he continued, while Yukon looked shocked. Last I heard your clan was wiped out by IWA. Though that does tend to happen when a clan is as weak as yours. Shut up before I kill you all! Yukon growled at the Jounin, who ignored him totally, instead turning to Shizune. Shizune-san, think you can handle it? Shizune turned to look at Kakashi, looking rather insulted. Think I can handle it? A small grin, totally unlike her usual timid personality blooming on her face, she turned to Yukon, who was staring at her, irritated. With a slight hum of medical chakra, her hand lit up with a chakra scalpel. Remember, Kakashi-kun, I'm an apprentice of a Sannin, just like your sensei. And as for you, your clan techniques didn't work against your main enemies mainly because IWA just cut their losses and killed their own with your clan, she added, looking at Yukon. Yukon snorted. You Konoha bastards are too soft for that, he scoffed. So what are you going to do, woman? This, Shizune said softly. There was a sound of displaced air, and before Yukon could even blink, Shizune had appeared in front of him, chakra scalpel blazing as it tore through his chest, leaving behind no visible wound. Before Yukon could even think to counterattack, she had ghosted back to her original position, watching him expectantly. Yukon flailed around in surprise for a moment before regaining his balance. You missed, he stated, looking somewhat shocked, but he soon regained his superior sneer. I don't know how you did it, but you won't do it again. Kakashi snorted as Shizune deactivated her chakra scalpel and relaxed. Nope. The fight's already over, he stated blandly, while Yukon's retort was cut off midstream as he keeled over, vomiting blood on the ground. Ah! Yelling in agony, Yukon Kiba's body began to bubble, before Yukon's body began to gradually emerge from Kiba's, both screaming in agony when they weren't coughing up blood. Shizune looked on clinically, as if it was nothing more than a cadaver in one of her master's experiments. Finally, after Yukon had totally separated from Kiba, Yukon's host immediately falling limp as Shizune nonchalantly approached the pair. Yukon stared hatefully at her. What did you do to me? He demanded between his hoarse coughing. Shizune looked at him, face devoid of compassion as she crouched in front of the unconscious Kiba, her hands lighting up again, this time a gentle green instead of the harsh white it had been before. I cut up the lining of your lungs and nicked an artery, she explained unsympathetically. Even now your lungs are filling with fluid. Soon you will find it hard to breathe, and then you will drown in your own blood. Whatever Yukon had tried to say was lost as he succumbed to another fit of coughing, blood now leaking from his nostrils as he curled around himself. Tenten shuddered, shocked at Shizune's cruelty, before she jumped in surprise as Shizune looked straight at her. Remember this lesson, Tenten-san. This is what happens when someone is overly reliant on one skill. Any skill can always be countered. Tenten nodded weakly. Suddenly Kiba came to with a gasp, coughing up blood. Shaking his head, he looked around, noticing Shizune, who was still crouched over him employing the mystical palm technique. Thanks Shizune-san. Shizune gave him a somewhat strained smile. It was a close call. Now we have to go. Tsunade-sama may need my help. Asuma's eyebrow twitched. Guy, what are you doing here? Guy stood at attention. I have a most unyouthful message for Tsunade-sama, he repeated. Asuma, wincing at the tone of the exuberant Jounin, groaned pathetically. What is it? Guy's reply was cut off as Tsunade sat up, before a punch slammed across Guy's face, tossing him 20 feet away and into a tree. Guy! What have I told you about shouting when I'm working? Tsunade seethed, a malevolent aura surrounding her. Asuma gulped. If Guy didn't have a good excuse, it seemed probable that the great green beast was going to be skinned by a demonic senju. Guy groaned from where he was, slumped in the middle of an explosion of wooden splinters. Not to? He squeaked, staring as Tsunade approached him, her fists erupting chakra. She was just a few steps from Guy, who was trying to shrink into himself like he was one of his summons, when a voice called out to her, startling Asuma and the ANBU. That's quite enough, Tsutsu. We don't have time for one of your temper tantrums. Not when Naruto-kun needs immediate medical help, you know. Asuma, the ANBU, and Guy all looked in the direction of the voice. At first, there was nothing. Then, gradually, a misty form appeared, coalescing to form the figure of a petite woman in formal dress. And she didn't seem to be happy with the lot of them. Tsunade's shoulders slumped. Sorry, grandmother, she sighed, her hair falling over her eyes as she turned back. It's just, what? Tsunade-sama, Asuma interrupted, swiveling to look between Tsunade and the wraith. Why your grandmother? How? Tsunade's shoulders slumped further as she gave a tired sigh, her hand going to the bridge of her nose as she tried to stave off her headache. I'm not in the mood for this, she groaned, before she gave Mito an evil look. If you had to appear right now, you can take care of the introductions, she huffed as she stalked back to where Naruto was and began healing him once more. Eyeing the ANBU and the Jounin that were watching her with obvious curiosity, Mito turned towards them, smiling gently. Hello, I'm Mito Senju Uzumaki, wife of the Shodame Hokage and the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Nice to meet you. Behind her, Tsunade facepalmed, as the jaws of the assembled Jounin dropped simultaneously. Grandmother, she groaned, I didn't tell you to confuse them even more. Mito blinked, then blinked again. I don't know what you mean. Tsunade groaned, the medical chakra in her hands flickering out as she finished Naruto's treatment. Of course you don't. Briefly looking at Guy, who cringed, she continued with a long-suffering sigh. Now Guy, if you don't want to get punched back to Konoha, just tell us the message you brought. For a moment her eyes seemed to drill through Guy with her glare. Without any mention of youth, if you know what's good for you, Guy gulped. Ah yes, Tsunade-sama, he paused, cringing, before continuing hesitantly. Shimura Danzo-sama has declared war against Suna with the aid of the council. A shocked silence descended on the group, only broken by a stifled yelp by the rabbit Anbu. Asuma's chakra blades hung limp from his fingers as he gaped at the green-suited Jounin in thinly suppressed horror. While the Jounin and Mito looked between Guy and Tsunade apprehensively, Tsunade had gone very still. The silence was broken by the sound of gritting teeth from an expressionless Tsunade. For a moment, everybody looked at her, expecting some indication of anger. Instead, she got up almost robotically, before giving Guy a blank stare. How did Danzo get it through? In the absence of the sitting Hokage, such decisions have to be taken in council with the civilian elders, the Hokage advisors and the division commanders. Her voice was low, almost nonchalant, except for the sliver of venom that crept into the voice when she mentioned Danzo. Collectively, all the assembled Jounin had a similar thought. It would not be fun to be Danzo when Tsunade next met him. Guy swallowed. Somehow the calm Tsunade was more terrifying than an enraged one. Hokage-sama, the Anu. Faced with Tsunade's gimlet eye, Guy quickly bit back the rest of the word. Ah sorry, Hokage-sama. Danzo-sama has exposed Sabaka no Gaara's status as a Jinchuriki, and is using Naruto-san's unfortunate circumstances to rally support for the movement. At that, Tsunade went, if possible, even more still. Faint wisps of chakra arcing around her form, she looked into Guy's eyes, her own burning with the promise of retribution. What? Her voice was scarcely louder than a whisper, but the words, uttered whip-like by the enraged Hokage, nevertheless reached each person there. For a moment, even Mito flinched at the sheer venom in Tsunade's tone, before she turned towards her granddaughter. Now is not the time, Tsunade-chan. Tsunade turned to look at her, her eyes blazing, before she paused at the way Mito had addressed her. What do you mean now's not the time? She asked tiredly. Ignoring her, Mito walked past her to where Naruto was lying, before she bent down and hefted Naruto onto her shoulder in a fireman's carry. I don't know about you, but I'm not about to bring an injured child, not to mention my heir, to the village when Danzo seems to be building up a mob to lynch him. Tsunade seemed to deflate, all the anger draining out of her at the realization. That's true, but where are you going to take him? He needs to rest and recuperate. The drain to his life energy is no joke, grandmother, he could fall into a coma any moment now. Mito turned towards her, giving Tsunade a wan smile. Granddaughter, you are forgetting he's an Uzumaki, you know. Besides, I was thinking, Tsutsu, it's time for him to visit his roots. Tsunade stared at her. Grandmother, you don't mean, I mean, that's a ruin, surely you don't. Mito's lips twitched. You're babbling, Tsutsu. Besides, not all of it is ruins, you know. Tsunade glared at her. Mito smirked back at her challengingly. Have it your way, grandmother, Tsunade said resignedly after a moment. Mito nodded, all frivolity gone, as she turned to leave. However, she immediately jumped away as Asuma Shun shined in front of her, chakra blades blazing. Hokage-sama? He called out, staring suspiciously at Mito. Tsunade frowned. Stand down, Asuma, she said tiredly. But Hokage-sama, you can't let a non-Konoha shinobi take Konoha's Jinchuriki. He argued, not taking his eyes off Mito's tense form. Tsunade scowled back at him, making him flinch back. Asuma, she drawled, irritation obvious in her tone, I told her to take Naruto, removing one of our shinobi from a potentially volatile situation. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. So what is it, Asuma? Do I have to explain every decision I make, or are you refusing orders from your Hokage? Asuma stuttered. I am sorry, Tsunade-sama, he said after a moment, chastised. Tsunade sighed again, covering her eyes. I'm sorry too, Asuma, she mumbled, it's just, I understand, Hokage-sama. Asuma interrupted her, and Tsunade gave him an unsteady smile. Thanks, Mito scoffed at Asuma, before calling out to Tsunade as she walked past him. I assume you can take care of the Danzo issue on your own? Don't worry, grandmother. I'm going to make the bastard suffer, she said menacingly, a bloodthirsty smirk creeping across her face. By the way, I'll send Shizune along later. That brat needs a medic to look after him, at least for the next few days. Fine. I have to go now if I want to reach my destination before tomorrow. With a nod of assent and the slight noise of a shunshin, Mito disappeared in a flash of smoke. Being unconscious was troublesome. Waking up was more so. Nara, Shikamaru groaned as he slowly came to from his impromptu nap on the forest floor. From what he felt, he was being carried piggyback by a shinobi. He could feel the starchy hardness of a Konoha standard flak jacket digging uncomfortably into his ribs, and the smell of smoke emanating from the figure carrying him. While many shinobi smoked intermittently to steady their nerves, it was generally considered bad form to smoke so much that the smell clung to them, seeing as it was a possible means of tracking the shinobi. There were only 2 shinobi he knew that smoked so regularly that the smell clung to their clothes, and one of them, the Sandaime Hokage, was dead. So it was Asuma sensei carrying him. That was interesting. Giving up the half-formed plans of pretending to be asleep. It wouldn't matter anyway. What with the thrice-damned earrings? Shikamaru cautiously opened his eyes and peeked over the shoulder of Asuma. Then he heard a low chuckle. So, finally decided to stop pretending to be asleep, Shikaku-en? Asuma asked, giving him an amused grin. Sensei. Troublesome. Shikamaru greeted his teacher with a sigh, looking over his shoulder at the group of ninja around him. The Hokage was traveling at the head of the group, and judging by her pursed lips and rigid posture, she didn't seem pleased by the turn of events. Surrounding her was a contingent of ANBU, and at their rear was a severely depressed-looking Hatake Kakashi. Not that others could tell, Shikamaru thought. The only thing different was that the eccentric Jounin's eyes were droopy and his hands hung rather limply, as if he was forcing himself to walk. At first glance it looked like the man was just sleepy. Gambling. That was the only word Shikamaru could come up with. Around the depressed Jounin was a hyper-man in a green leotard. So that was Mito Guy, the sensei of Team 9. That was interesting. Behind him, Chuji, who looked relatively unharmed, was carrying a very battered and bloodied Kiba, whose head was flopping listlessly behind him, clearly unconscious. Niji was behind them, looking somewhat battered as well, though he was trying to hide the fact under all the layers of aloof indifference he had around him. He was supporting an exhausted Tenten, who seemed to be favoring her left side. She was also hugging the limp form of Akamaru, whose white fur was matted with blood. Looking around, he noticed a quite obvious absence. Sensei, where is Naruto? Shikamaru asked quietly, a pool of apprehension seeping through him. He couldn't be dead. Shikamaru refused to believe that. The blonde genin might not be the best fighter around, but his instincts and endurance were unmatched in their generation. In a true life-and-death situation, especially against a weaker opponent than what he had faced, Naruto would simply outlast his opponent until he won. Several of the group looked up at the question. From what he observed, none of the genin knew what had happened to Naruto, judging by their worried expressions. In stark contrast, all the Jounin tensed. In front of the group, Tsunade-sama was clenching her fists while Kakashi seemed to be even more depressed at the question. For a moment, no one answered. Then Tsunade sighed. Genin Uzumaki has been transported to a safe house after his fight with Uchiha Sasuke due to instability in the current political climate of Konoha, she said shortly, her fists curling on themselves in her ire. It was obvious that it was not something she enjoyed doing. Whatever answer Shikamaru had expected, that was not it. Shikamaru stiffened in surprise, his mind whirring, trying to make sense of the Hokage's cryptic words. Fight with Sasuke? Naruto should have been already in Konoha by now, not fighting Sasuke. But perhaps he was being naive. Knowing Naruto as he did, he knew that he would have rushed into battle again as soon as he finished his current opponent. But that brought a set of questions of their own. He had estimated that Naruto would be able to barely beat the large Sound 4 member, but to defeat him and then go on to fight Sasuke as well meant that Shikamaru had drastically underestimated the skill of the once blonde redhead. And what did the Hokage mean current political climate? That could only mean that the Hokage suspected that Naruto would be in danger inside the village, and the only reason for that at this particular moment. Hokage-sama, did Naruto kill Sasuke? Shikamaru asked warily, as the genin behind him gasped at the question. Tsunade stopped in place, forcing her entourage to stop as well, before she turned to stare at Shikamaru. Shikamaru held her gaze unflinchingly. He needed to know what went on in his squad. He was responsible for them in this mission until the Hokage, or a Jounin, officially relieved him, and they had not done so yet. You Naras are really too troublesome for your own good, Tsunade said finally, looking rather reluctantly impressed. The answer to that question is both yes and no. A strangled gasp came from the genin behind them. So it was news to them as well, Shikamaru thought. Strangely, the thought of Sasuke's death, especially at Naruto's hands, didn't faze him as much as he thought it would. Instead he was remembering something that his father had said to him some time ago. Remember son, in the shinobi world, the one who shows off the most is the one that gets killed off first. Shikamaru had to stifle a snort at the thought. he wasn't feeling very sympathetic towards Sasuke at the moment. In fact, he was more concerned as to the effect this would have on Naruto, both psychologically and in his interactions with the civilian population of Konoha. After all, he wasn't blind. He knew that for some reason the civilians, and a significant amount of the shinobi, hated Naruto. He even knew that it had something to do with Kyuubi, though that had needed no intelligence on his part. What else was he supposed to infer when the people called Naruto Fox Brat and Demon interchangeably behind his back? For some reason, he really doubted that killing the renegade Uchiha would improve Naruto's non-existent standing in Konoha. Anyway, what do you mean yes and no, Hokage-sama? Tsunade looked past him at the group of genin behind, before she gave an exasperated sigh. Honestly, I don't know why I took this bloody job in the first place, she muttered, before she looked up, a contemplative look on her face. All right, all of you brats, gather around, Tsunade yelled at the genin, who flinched before cautiously coming near her. Now brats, I'm going to tell this just once, and you better listen up. No interruptions, got it? The assembled genin nodded, cowed. Tsunade smirked. Right. Now as to why I said yes and no, Chunin Shikamaru, she paused. It's because Naruto didn't kill him per se. He sealed Sasuke within himself, just like the Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi within Naruto. Shizune was silent, deep in thought as she tree-hopped away her way southwards in the Konoha forest. Not that that was in any way out of the norm, with her habit of blending into the background and observing the surroundings quietly. However, the perplexed frown that marred her face would have looked rather out of place on the soft-spoken jounin to any outside observer. Seeing as there was nobody to notice her lapse, however, Shizune was at peace to ponder over her earlier meeting and try to make sense of the mission that her master had given her. That her master had given her instructions for a solo mission was not unusual. In their travels, Tsunade had often given her similarly obscure instructions, though that was mostly in order to evade debt collectors. But even by those standards, this message was unusual. Flashback. Shizune had just corralled the tired genin to the valley of the end that Tsunade had made the rendezvous point. Kiba, with his internal injuries, depleted chakra core and a mild concussion, was completely unconscious and being supported by a clearly reluctant Kakashi. Tenten was walking with a limp, favoring her side where she had taken a rather substantial hit by the Yukon-possessed Kiba, while Niji, noticeably ruffled, was stiffly holding an unconscious Shikamaru up. Chuji brought up the rear, looking rather lost. When she entered the Valley of the End, the first thing she noticed was the debris. Stone chipped from the statues were scattered far and wide, with occasional kunai amongst them, making the area around the pool resemble a battlefield in the Third Shinobi War. The statues were almost unidentifiable, with scorch marks, craters and gouges from what looked like a large blade littering its surface. The pool's water was slowly regaining its former color, washing away the murky crimson pools of blood in it. On the feet of Madara's statue, near a large pool of brackish blood, stood Tsunade and her entourage. Tsunade was squatting, examining the blood on the ground with almost religious fervor, something which was both surprising and at the same time not. Yes, she thought, Tsunade had come back from her hemophobia with a vengeance. If it continued, she expected Tsunade to soon become the world's foremost expert on blood and blood-related diseases. She barely withheld a smirk at the thought. She could just imagine what Orochimaru would think of that. As the genin looked around curiously, Shizune headed over to where Tsunade was, when Tsunade suddenly looked up and beckoned. As she came closer, she soon noticed that the pool of blood was much larger than she had first thought it to be. In fact, there was, by her estimate, at least 2 pints of blood on the ground. Whoever had bled that much must surely be dead or at least in a coma from blood loss. She just didn't know whose it was. Tsunade got up as she approached. Ah. Shizune. Good timing, I was going to search for you. Shizune quirked an eyebrow in response, coming closer to her master. Her ponytails were awry and her face looked troubled. Something was troubling her. Something wrong, Tsunade-sama? At that, guy, when had he even got here? Stepped forward, his boisterous voice sounding like a foghorn in the subdued crowd. Ah, youthful Shizune-san, a most youthful spirit, most unyouthfully spirited the youthful Naruto-kun. Guy. Tsunade looked livid. What did I tell you about using that word? At her words, Guy quailed. Shrinking from the approaching woman, Guy attempted to respond. Ah, not to, Tsunade-sama? Tsunade's lips curled into a thin smirk as she passed Guy, before her hand snapped forward and hooked itself to Shizune's elbow. Dragging her away, Tsunade looked back at Guy. See that you don't. The last thing Shizune heard was Kakashi lazily saying, Ma, cheer up, before she was bodily pulled into a bush after Tsunade. Aie. Tsunade-sama. Before she could continue her indignant scream, a hand snapped over her mouth, and she was twisted around to face her teacher, who she was beginning to think had lost her mind. Tsunade had a mischievous grin on her face, which made her look that much more deranged in her opinion. Frantically trying to backpedal, Shizune looked at Tsunade hesitantly. "Tsunade-sama," she repeated, snapping herself out of her blind panic and taking a few deep breaths before continuing. "Why did you do that?" Tsunade was apparently immune to the note of accusation in her tone. That?" she replied airily. "I just wanted to talk to you in private." She really had to find another method to stop her instinctive retorts, she mused as she contented herself with an incredulous glance at her obviously deranged master, biting her lip hurt. "Tsunade-sama, are you sure you're not sick?" It biting her lip was ineffective as well as painful. Though, to be fair, what she had wanted to say initially had been much more caustic. Oh well, maybe she could just forget this one little indiscretion. It wasn't as if anyone was watching. Though if Tsunade's eyes continued to twinkle like that, Tsunade was giggling now. "Oh, your face. That was priceless," she stuttered out between her giggles. They dried up quickly enough, however, when Shizune pinned her with a glare. Shizune was getting a bit paranoid herself. Tsunade never got this obnoxiously exuberant unless she was trying really hard not to murder someone in cold blood, or was trying to escape someone after screwing them over. She sweat dropped. Why was she babysitting a woman 20 years her senior anyway? Oh right. Tsunade would probably either kill herself or the world if she was not there to curb the wilder side of her character. So maybe she should stop getting so worked up, and instead get to the bottom of this particular psychotic fit. Tsunade. That got Tsunade's attention, she saw. Shizune rarely called her anything other than Tsunade-sama or the occasional master. "What happened?" Tsunade gave her a scathing look. Fine, she pouted, spoilsport. When Shizune continued to stare at her unflinchingly though, Tsunade began to fidget before holding her hands in front of her. "Whoa, Shizune, I'll tell, Shizune huffed. "You better, or knowing you I'll have to stop you from burning down Konoha," Tsunade pouted. "I wasn't going to burn down all of it. Be serious, Tsunade-sama," Shizune snapped. She really wasn't in the mood to deal with Tsunade's moods right now. "Now what did you want me for?" Seeing her apprentice wasn't in the mood for her antics seemed to calm Tsunade down. "Right. I wanted to give you a solo mission," she said, beginning to lay down her instructions. "A solo mission? Now?" Shizune interrupted her, surprised at the unusual request. "Tsunade-sama, what's going on?" Tsunade exhaled harshly, obviously trying to control her temper. "Too much to explain right now, Shizune," she said after a moment of hesitation. "Suffice it to say that I have to go back to Konoha and knock some old heads together." Shizune could see this was serious, and Tsunade would clearly not be deviated from her path. The last time she had seen her so coldly angry had been when Orochimaru had visited them, soon after his defection from Konoha. The snake Sannin had barely escaped with his life back then. So she did the only thing she could do, get out of the way. "What do you want me to do, Tsunade-sama?" Tsunade smiled. "Go to the whirlpools and meet a ghost." "Huh?" As Shizune stared at her, confused, Tsunade's eyes twinkled maddeningly. She was clearly enjoying her confusion. "Meet a ghost? You'll know when you see it." That was all Tsunade seemed willing to say on the matter. Shizune sighed. Sometimes her master, for all her maturity, could be incredibly childish, not to mention annoying. "I don't want this information to go any further," Tsunade continued warningly. "By the way, you've got your emergency rations and medical kit, right?" "Of course, Tsunade-sama," she answered, feeling quite insulted. As if she would ever travel without her medkit. Though why would she need it? "Tsunade-sama, what exactly am I going to be doing after I meet the ghost?" "Helping a suicidal brat recover from depleted life force," Tsunade answered. "Honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with that kid," she continued, grumbling under her breath even as Shizune gasped. I've got no time to explain any further, and neither do you," Tsunade stated, looking at the sun. "I'll have to start pretty quickly if I want to stop Danzo marching to Suna." Looking at Shizune's bugged-out eyes, she muffled a giggle. "I'll tell you later, you better go now. If they get inside the village, you'll never find them," Tsunade added. "Don't worry, I'll send Katsuyu with the news by tomorrow." End flashback. Depleted life force. That was something she had not heard mentioned in a long time. Though somewhat similar, life force was unique from chakra in that it was tied to the natural lifespan of an organism. It was also normally unable to be tapped by humans, and unrecoverable. Once you use any part of your life force, it was irrecoverably lost. That was the reason survival after its use was almost considered a myth. Life force using jutsu did exist, but those usually were of the suicide technique type, and they used the user's acceptance of death to call up the life force. There were exactly two different methods of accidentally using up life force: sealing techniques and chakra exhaustion. And seeing as Naruto was the bearer of a unique seal and had been in consecutive fights for almost a day, it could be either. Personally, she hoped it was the seal. Depleted life force on top of the normal chakra exhaustion usually caused irreversible damage to the victim's chakra network. When she almost missed her step on a branch, she refocused on her traveling. It was no use speculating on her patient's state until she got there. As Tsunade always said, she would get there, do her best, and hope that it was enough. She could only try to get there as fast as possible. She didn't want the child that had managed to worm his way into Tsunade's cold heart to die. 4 hours later, Shizune had finally caught up to the source of the strangely light footsteps she had been following. For a moment, she stuttered on her step, unsure of what she was seeing. Sure, Tsunade had said she was going to meet a ghost, but she had figured her master was speaking figuratively. What she was watching, however, was making her instinctively search her chakra for any sign of a genjutsu. For surely there couldn't be a figure, only discernible through slight deflection in the light patterns, carrying Naruto on its back? It wasn't even an invisibility cloaking jutsu like Tsunade's teammate Jiraiya was rumored to have developed, because she could feel the chakra of the strange being carrying Naruto. The very chakra of the ghost, as Tsunade had called it, seemed somehow out of phase with reality, with a strange ethereal quality. In spite of this, though, Shizune knew that the figure was corporeal. The indents it was leaving in the tree bark were real enough, though they did seem rather light for a grown person. "Hello, Shizune-san? Enjoying the view?" A voice crooned in her ear. Stifling her shriek through years of kunoichi training, she twisted around to come face to face with the person she had been trailing. Only she, for the figure was obviously a woman, was quite more material than the one she had been trailing, with her body actually reflecting some color. Though, to be fair, it still looked more like stained glass than an actual human being. And her face was mere inches away from her. Instinctively, with reflexes honed by a lifetime as a shinobi, she lashed out with a senbon at the figure's exposed neck, only for her hand to be caught in a vice-like grip just when it was about to pierce the jugular of her assailant. "Now that was very rude, Shizune-san. What has that granddaughter of mine been teaching you?" "Gigi granddaughter?" The ghost woman smiled thinly. "Indeed." Turning back, she crouched, getting ready to travel again. "I assume Tsunade sent you?" "Yes, ma'am. Call me Mito. Come along." With that, Mito spun around and leapt back into the trees. Shizune, who was following her, was feeling incredibly out of her depth. Of course she knew who Mito Senju was. The wife of the Shodame had been the one to design many of the medical seals that Konoha General Hospital used to this very day. But she also knew that Mito was supposed to have died around the time she was born, probably even before Jiraiya took the Yondaime as his apprentice. But this specter certainly resembled the few portraits of Mito Senju that had survived to this day in the now abandoned Senju clan home. It was undoubtedly who she was claiming to be. There was no way Tsunade could mistake the figure of her grandmother after all, and the thought that Tsunade, who had studied illusions and concealment jutsu for over a decade, could be fooled by an impostor was ludicrous. Shizune pondered the power of the woman kunoichi who she was following. Whatever her body was, the power exuding off her figure was palpable. It wasn't chakra pressure like the Sandaime, Jiraiya, or even Tsunade exuded, and it wasn't even killing intent like Orochimaru. It was simply grace. The woman moved with a quiet self-assurance that was present in only the most seasoned of warriors, every muscle movement choreographed like an elegant dance. However, in stark contrast to the bloodier kunoichi such as Anko or Tsum, the aura surrounding the woman did not make her seem threatening. Instead, the woman made you feel inadequate. It was like she had an aura of royalty surrounding her, though the fact that she was following the supposedly dead but apparently alive wife of the Shodame did nothing to calm her nerves. She really didn't like going into a situation blindly. Though she seemed to be doing that quite often lately, Shizune thought somewhat sourly, as she stared at the back of Mito. The stately woman had not graced her with a single glance, let alone a word, since the original greeting. Instead, the woman, who had become invisible once more, was steadily tree-hopping her way to the Uzushiogaki ruins, cradling the unconscious Naruto to her chest. "You know, if you want to ask something, you should talk instead to staring at me." Mito's dry voice cut through her thoughts. Shaken out of her contemplation, Shizune refocused on Mito, who had not even turned her head. Had she really been that obvious? Ah. Shizune paused, unsure how to delicately approach the subject of her non-death. Mito's lips were twitching, even as her pace slowed as she came abreast of the embarrassed Hokage's assistant. "Why aren't you dead? That's what you were going to ask, right?" Humor was lacing her words, somehow making the regal woman somehow more approachable than before. Shizune flushed in mortification. "Ah no, ma'am." Mito gave her an indulgent smile. "Don't be embarrassed," she said soothingly. "I would have been more surprised if a medical professional like yourself did not question me on my apparent lack of mortality." Turning to look Shizune in the eye, Mito proceeded to glare at her. "And I thought I told you to call me Mito." Shizune blushed further. "Sorry, Mito-sama," Mito sighed, before she gave Shizune a flat look. "You really are a skittish thing, aren't you?" she asked jokingly, before breaking out in a sudden smile. The change that the smile wrought on her face was incredible, Shizune thought. Where before she had looked every bit the stateswoman, all refined expressions, emotionless face and calculating eyes, she now looked beautiful. Even if the shadows behind her eyes told her that the woman had seen things in her life she could never completely forget. "And to answer your question, I'm not currently dead because I'm not currently alive." Having given that extremely cryptic answer, Mito smiled at her before tree-hopping ahead again. The conversation was clearly over, yet Shizune couldn't help staring at her retreating back, even as she accelerated her own pace in order to keep up. At least now she knew where Tsunade had got her love for cryptic statements from. When Tsunade's group finally reached the great gates of Konoha, what they saw was a ghost town. The streets were deserted, the few people in the streets scurrying with their head down. Tsunade looked around the village dispassionately. She had half expected this to happen. She really should have left somebody who could be trusted to not to start off the Fourth Shinobi War. But the fact remained that she had really not had the time to house clean yet. Though if nothing else, this provided her with the necessary leverage to oust the old farts that had entrenched themselves in all the higher administrative posts. And if she had any say in it, Danzo would be the first to go. That man was dangerous. "This is it, brats." Tsunade stopped in the middle of the street, where the road split into three, with one fork going to the residential districts, one to the outer districts, and the third to the administrative district, which housed the Hokage Tower as well as Konoha General Hospital. "Now all of you are to report to the hospital," she continued, her gimlet gaze resting on both Shikamaru and Kiba longer than on the others. The genin singled out slumped, before they reluctantly began their march to the hospital. Ignoring their pleading expressions, and conveniently forgetting that she too had hated hospitals at that age, Tsunade turned towards the ANBU who had been standing silently behind her. "Tiger Rabbit, head to the barracks and report to the captain. I'll take it from here." With a mumbled Tsunade-sama, the ANBU shun shined away in a swirl of leaves. Finally, and somewhat reluctantly, Tsunade turned towards the final group with her. "Asuma, come with me to the meeting," she said tiredly, before turning around and walking towards the Hokage Tower. "Might as well deal with the fossils now," she muttered under her breath, even as Guy and Asuma fell into step behind her. "Tsunade-sama?" Hearing her name called out, Tsunade looked back. Truthfully, she had half expected this. "Yes, Kakashi?" The one-eyed shinobi had clearly seen better days. His one exposed eye was droopy and lifeless, and his attire was uncharacteristically rumpled. If that wasn't enough evidence, he was slumped in on himself piteously, looking utterly defeated. Still, the man's mental strength was admirable. Straightening up and looking Tsunade in the eye, Kakashi was obviously trying to play off his mental state as inconsequential. "Nah, Tsunade-sama," his lone visible eye crinkled in his trademark smile. "Wouldn't it be better if I came along too?" Tsunade's face softened as she slowly walked towards Kakashi. The cycloptic Jounin warily took a step back, but before he could retreat any further his shoulder was caught in a vice-like grip and Tsunade's face was looming over his. "Kakashi, you're currently not in a fit mood to plant a tree, let alone face those old fossils." Even through his depressed mood, Kakashi couldn't help sweat dropping at the blunt statement. Though the statement was as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, Tsunade's tone had been soft, almost motherly. It was a welcome relief from what he had actually expected, which was another dressing down. After all, saying that Kakashi was currently not in Tsunade's good graces would be an understatement. He had hardly had any time to relax, however, when Tsunade's fist descended onto his face with all the force of a real sledgehammer. Caught off guard, Kakashi caught the blow full in the face, resulting in him being thrown off his feet and into the ground where he landed in an ing heap of flesh. Smiling triumphantly, Tsunade brushed off her hands. "Guy, can you have Kakashi over for the day?" Though the statement was worded as a question, the Jounin wearing the green leotard recognized it for what it was. "Oh, of course, Tsunade-sama. Excellent." Beaming, Tsunade turned back to Kakashi, who was just getting back to his feet. "Now go to Guy's house and stay there until tomorrow morning," she ordered Kakashi, who stared back at her with his slack jaw visible even through his cloth mask. Though he still shrunk into himself, when a predatory smirk stole across her face. At 10 a.m. tomorrow, you will report to the Yamanaka Ishin ward in Konoha General. If you're late, I will issue mandatory taijutsu practice for you with Guy. Understood? By now, Kakashi was nodding his head so fast he resembled a bobblehead. Why yes, of course, Tsunade-sama. Grinning from ear to ear, Tsunade turned to leave. And Kakashi? That punch was for acting like a wet blanket. You won't act like a wet blanket again, will you? No, Tsunade-sama, humph. We'll see. With that, she turned to the dumbfounded Asuma and Guy. Well, what are you waiting for? Come on, we've got a bunch of old farts to dismember. As she strolled down the street without looking back, her words floated back to the petrified pair. I have a good feeling about this. Asuma looked at Guy. Guy looked at Asuma. Simultaneously deciding to ignore that it had happened at all, the two fell into step behind their Hokage, who was now whistling a funeral march. Behind them, Kakashi stared at their backs, a shell-shocked look on his face. Naruto woke up to the gentle caress of a soft hand running through his hair. It took all the strength he had to stop a groan of discomfort. His whole body hurt with a dull, bone-deep ache that permeated every cell of his body. Wearily opening his eyes, he was immediately assaulted by an acute piercing headache. Disorientated, it was quite some time before he could bear opening his eyes again. When he finally managed it, he found that he was in some sort of open circular chamber that only had the futon he currently occupying and a few scattered chairs in it. The walls were painted a faded yellow, and from the few strange slit windows in the walls let in streams of soft morning sunlight. For a moment he was lost in thought, thinking about what had happened. Though some parts of it were obscured and muffled, no doubt due to the influence of the Kyubi chakra, some parts stood out starkly. Staring up at the impaled figure of Jirabu, blood dripping down the chains onto his face, wearing chain links cutting into the exposed body of Kimimaro, agonized screams echoing in his ears, staring at the aftermath of his jutsu, looking blankly at the blob of pink flesh that was once a person, Rasengan whirring, drilling into the shoulder of Sasuke as he screamed, looking on, unbelieving, as Sasuke fell back, blood spewing from the stump of his arm, an inhuman face surrounded by a shock of white hair looming over him. Shuddering, Naruto turned his head, his hair brushing against his strangely soft pillow as looked at the person currently running their hand through his hair, hoping for something to distract him. All thoughts of falling back asleep had faded by now. Even if it wasn't for the pain that permeated his body, he wasn't sure he would be able to face the nightmares if he fell asleep now. Looking up, he found the still form of Mito. Only the gentle rise and fall of her chest, and the hand brushing his hair marring her perfect stillness. Mito was resting against the foot of an old battered wooden chair, her head flung back and holding Naruto's head in what Naruto suddenly realized was her lap. The mouth was slightly curved in a gentle smile, and her eyes were slightly glazed. All in all, she looked to be at peace, far more than Naruto had ever seen her. For a while, Naruto simply stared at the relaxed figure of Mito, basking in the contentment of the moment. Then the hand running furrows through his hair suddenly stopped, and Mito looked down into Naruto's eyes, a soft smile on her face. Hello there, Naruto-kun. Naruto gently coughed to clear his throat. Hello, ghost lady, he rasped, before giving the strange room an exaggerated glance. Where are we? Mito's smile widened, looking somewhat between melancholy and deliriously happy. Naruto-kun, she paused, gesturing widely with the hand not lying on his head. Welcome to Yuzushiogakure. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Harry's Otter for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.